Recording in progress. Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Lampert-Rudman. I'm the Curator of Education and Public Programs at Morven Museum and Garden. And to my right is Kim Gallagher, who's a docent here at Morven. And today we're going to take you through another Morven moment.
Today's Morven moment is focused on Helen Hamilton Shields Stockton. So that's the person we're concentrating on. And the time period that we'll be talking about is about 1890 to about 1928.
And the recording you're going to be seeing today is being done in October. However, it was originally done in September for a particular reason. Happy birthday to Helen.
I'm Kim Gallagher, a docent at Morven, and this is another Morven moment. It's September 2021, and we are celebrating the birthday of Helen Hamilton Shields Stockton. We've moved in time to a period roughly 1890s to the 1920s. Helen Hamilton Shields was born September 12, 1864, and she became Helen Hamilton Shields Stockton when she married Bayard Stockton, great-great-grandson of Richard the Signer, on July 12, 1894. And we call Helen the keeper of the flame.
Yeah, so we give thanks to Helen all the time. And we're sitting, if you can see where we're sitting, beside Helen's Colonial Revival garden. And there is a photo of her actually in her garden with her dog Viking, her Great Dane Viking in 1908. And I think we have some stories about Viking.
Viking, unfortunately, a couple years later, was apparently poisoned. We know that it was probably someone who did it because Bayard, Helen's husband, put an article in the paper offering a $50 reward for capture of the culprit. As much as they could do for the dog, unfortunately, he died in a day or two. And whether or not the culprit was ever identified, whether the reward was ever paid, we don't know.
Sad, very sad. And our next feature is how Helen actually became a Stockton, which is.
So how did Helen Hamilton Shields become part of the Stockton family? Well, we have to put a little bit of background in place. As some of you may recall, in 1866, when Robert Field Stockton, the Commodore, died, the finances of the Stockton family weren't in great shape. At the time, he left Morven to his son Richard, who at the time was living in Springdale, one of the wonderful John Notman houses that the Commodore built for his children. But Richard was not able to afford both places. So in fact, in 1869, Morven and the farm associated with it was sold to Richard's cousin, Samuel Witham Stockton. Now, jump ahead to 1890, and Samuel Witham Stockton's finances aren't in very good shape either. At that point, Richard has passed away, but his son, Bayard, is now living in Springdale, and he's living there with this person right up here, Charles Woodruff Shields, a professor at Princeton University. He had married his daughter, Charlotte. Shields is a quite interesting character who was recruited by Princeton to be a professor of science, of the harmony of science and revealed religion, which he had made a name for himself beginning of the 1860s. Remember, this is shortly after Origin of the Species was published, and there was a big clash between religion and science. He was one of the people who were trying to put it back together. He and his daughter and his son-in-law and their children all lived together in Springdale in 1890, when it was clear that Samuel, Major Sam as he was called, was not going to be able to keep Morven. And in fact, the house was turned over to trustees. It was in May of 1891 that Charles Woodruff Shields bought Morven, made a deal such that he was able to pay for it by giving some of the land away, keeping about 5 acres, the same 5 acres we have today, in fact. Major Sam was still in the picture. He owned the farm, but he was out of the house. We don't know for sure, but we think that Bayard and Charles, his father-in-law, may have wanted to turn Morven into a rental property. For whatever reasons, it didn't work out. And the whole kit and caboodle, that is Charles, his daughter and son by a second marriage, the 2 sons of Bayard. Bayard was at this point widowed. His wife Charlotte had passed away. They all moved into Morven and tried to start getting it into shape. Now, at the same time, Helen, who was the stepsister of Charlotte, was starting a relationship with Bayard, and eventually they were married in July of 1894. So that's it. The connection, the Shields Stockton family, all living together in Morven. And even though Helen initially was sort of put off by the place, she very soon realized that she had an opportunity here. Remember, this was the era of the Colonial Revival, when historical houses and anything relating to the colonial period, and the colonial period was very widely defined, was very much in fashion. And it was Helen who really took advantage of that and made the house what it is today in many respects. So one of the things that she did, however, was she had a tendency to exaggerate some of the historical elements of the house and the people who visited here. This was not that unusual in the Colonial Revival movement. This was a time when people were nostalgic for the good old days and the symbolism associated with it. So it didn't have to be completely authentic. Nonetheless, Helen did have a tendency to kind of stretch things a little bit. And getting it published in important magazines and in book chapters, some of these myths became established fact up until our century right now. Here's one example. If you see this photo right here, this is from a party that was held on Christmas night in 1901. And Helen set the party up. As you can see, it was quite a party. It was a costume party, based on the idea that Morven was built. The initial Morven was built in 1701. Now, the fact is, the land that Morven is on was purchased from William Penn by the grandfather of the signer in 1701, but the house itself, especially the house that we're looking at right now, probably dates to 1758 and after, into the 1760s. Nonetheless, that was the story. She based it on an 1823 article that was in a book on the lives of the signers, where that claim was made. She just took advantage of it. Charles Woodruff Shields, who bought the house in 1891 and partnered with his son-in-law Bayard to take care of the real estate arrangements. As you can see, a very distinguished looking guy. He lived until 1904, at which point he bequeathed 1/3 holding of the house to Helen and the other 2/3 to his 2 grandsons, who were Helen's stepsons, Bayard Jr. and Richard III. One of the effects of these stories she was telling, and there were lots of them, we can tell a lot of these things, was that it really put Morven on the history map and made people want to visit the place, want to believe in the place, really. One example of that is shown in this photo right over here. Hope we can get it clearly enough. This is a photo taken on June 9th, 1922, when President at the time, Warren G. Harding, was visiting Princeton, and that picture is taken right in front of Morven, on the porch. And he was here for the dedication of the Princeton Battle Monument, which Helen's husband Baird had headed up the committee to get it built after about 40 years of the town dithering on what to do about having a monument.
So thanks to Kim, we're taking a little bit back into that time period with his phrases, whole kit and caboodle and dithering, and so we can get a little flavor for that. And another thing that gives us a little flavor for what things were like in Helen's time are her long-held Helen myths. So the one we talked about already, Morven was built in 1701. No, it wasn't. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and Lafayette visited Morven. No, they didn't. And then this one is a really great one. The General Cornwallis used Morven as his headquarters during the American Revolution. Is that true, Kim?
Cornwallis never used Morven as his headquarters. In fact, for most of the time that Princeton was occupied by the British, that is December 7th, 1776 to January 3rd, 1777, Cornwallis was based up in New York. In fact, late in December, he was preparing to go back to England because his wife was ill. But after the attack by Washington on Trenton, the day after Christmas, General Howe, the commander of the British forces in New York, more or less pulled Cornwallis off the ship and said, go after Washington. So he was only in Princeton, we think, on one night, the night of January 1st to 2nd, 1777. Is it possible that he stayed at Morven? Yes, it's possible, but it was not his headquarters. His headquarters was up in New York. The local commander was a general named Alexander Leslie, and in fact, his headquarters wasn't at Morven either, but at the president's house at the college, the house we call the McLean House now. And it was with Alexander Leslie and the other local commanders that Cornwallis met on that night and prepared for the fighting that continued into January 2nd and January 3rd. The story that she told went beyond the fact that this was Cornwallis's headquarters. I mean, she claimed that there was a Cornwallis bedroom and a Cornwallis bed, all things which were completely fabricated. Even the bed that she claimed was the Cornwallis bed couldn't have been built before 1830. So these are just some examples of the kinds of stories that Helen told.
Another one, a great one, was that the outbuilding behind the main house, now the museum shop, which hopefully you can see over there, was once the house of the enslaved, and that's not true based on when it was built. And
yeah, the wash house or the outbuilding behind Morven was probably built in the era of the Commodore, that is Robert Shields Stockton, so about 1850. And we know with a fair amount of certainty that there were no enslaved people associated with Morven after 1840, and that's based on census records.
And another one that you can actually come see this piece of furniture in the museum when you come visit. The highboy was a gift from George Washington to Annis Boudinot Stockton. That is definitely not true.
There's one true element to this story, and that is that the highboy does date from the 18th century. Everything else is pretty much made up.
Yeah, George Washington and Martha did not gift this to Annis and Richard for a wedding.
Yeah, it's almost impossible that they would have known each other. In fact, George and Martha were married after Richard and Annis were married. So this is, it's true that Washington and Annis were friends, probably dating from the 1780s. But the likelihood that he gave her a gift, even in that time period, is very low indeed. Mainly because Washington recorded everything. He wrote down every purchase he ever made, everything he ever gave to someone, that he got from someone. There is no record of the highboy going to Annis.
And behind us, you're going to see a portion of our gardens. And so Helen told people And she was highly regarded in the Garden Club of America. So what she told people, people believed and was written down. But she said Morven's original 18th century gardens were created by Richard Nannis were based on Alexander Pope's gardens at Twickenham. And not true.
It's true that Richard had gone to England in the 1760s, about 1767 to 68. And there is one letter that he sent to Annis that still exists, which indicates that he had intentions to visit Twickenham, which is southwest of London, or southwest of London at the time. But whether or not he actually went, whether or not he made some plans of the gardens, we don't know that at all.
And the great horse chestnut tree, which would have been over there, is behind our east wing, it was said to grow from chestnuts brought from a French chateau by the Huguenot brothers, Louis and Samuel Pintard, and given to the Signers sisters.
Well, I'm afraid this one isn't true either. For one thing, the Huguenot brothers, Louis and Samuel, were Americans, and they never were in France. So if they had gotten French chestnut tree seeds to plant behind Morven, well, that would have been impossible. And in any case, the horse chestnut that collapsed, I think it was about 1925 or so, was a beautiful old tree, but it was an American horse chestnut. It was not a French chestnut. So that was an embellishment of history as well.
And on we go.
Notice in the picture, this tankard, this is being held by Helen. This is Helen right here. The tankard, you can't see it obviously in the photo, engraved on it were the Stockton coat of arms and the Stockton motto, or what she claimed was the Stockton motto, which was Omnia Deo Pendent, all things come from God. And she claimed that that particular tankard had been buried in the woods in back of Morven when Cornwallis was here and the British were occupying Princeton. And it was one of the things that Annis saved for the family.
We love Helen. We love Helen. We love these stories.
We do. Yeah. It's important to point out that what Helen was doing in embellishing these stories, and in some cases, let's face it, she was making things up. This was not that unusual during the Colonial Revival period. Remember, the emphasis was not on authenticity so much as the feeling, the nostalgic feeling of the good old days. And there was a certain amount of competition as well between the various people who lived in this famous house and that famous house. Everyone wanted to have the best history. And it's kind of odd that Annis is who I'm thinking about, that Helen exaggerated so much, because a lot of the really true fact-based history was pretty spectacular for Morven, and much more so than many of the other houses, especially in the Princeton area.
Well, what's interesting too is if you look at the history of any of the books from that era, you see Mount Vernon, you see Monticello, and you see Morven.
Yeah.
And so you have to give her a lot of credit for that. And here we go.
Okay, now we're in the center of the gardens, and I hope you can appreciate what a lovely place this really is. The phlox over here, you'll notice, is a kind of a magenta mauve color. Interestingly, Helen really didn't like that color at all, and that was documented in a letter she sent to the Garden Clubs of America, in which she was complaining about the perennials versus annuals or whatever. And really, it's an indication that that Helen wanted this place the way she wanted it.
Absolutely true. And again, it was almost, I wonder, we'll never know actually if she had a master plan. But what we do know is what we have documented, which is, here's the letter. Can anyone tell me why so much of my garden has come out in magenta this year? It is a color I detest, and whenever a plant shows symptoms of this hated shade, it is taken out and set in a place apart. A leper patch. 2 flowers only are tolerated in crimson, a soft velvety sweet William from Abbotsford, and the fragrant bee balm so dear to our grandmothers. The sweet Dame Rocket was the first to appear dressed in calico, white with stripes of magenta. Then all the pale rose-colored peonies were crimson. The hollyhocks with pinked edges from Kew Gardens, usually white, yellow, and pale pink, were a blatant magenta, being 9 feet high and stronger and taller than usual. But the most surprising is the creamy yellow Gloire de Dijon rose, which was a deep pink. What enemy hath done this? Helen Hamilton Shields, a representative of the Garden Club of Princeton. So,
What
she was
enemy has
serious.
done
She was
this?
serious, and this is 1913. She's writing this, and it's published in the Bulletin of the Garden Club of America.
It's hard not to speculate that Helen may have been a difficult person to work for. And it's not too hard to speculate that perhaps her gardeners were the enemies who have done this.
And our gardeners have done this year. So if you look if you come visit, you'll see a lot of magenta dahlias.
Yeah, and they're beautiful.
And they're spectacular, but it's so funny. We know it's an inside joke as to why we have a lot of magenta growing. And for me, what's also very interesting is how, again, she had put Morven in the news, and Morven was at the 2nd annual meeting of the Garden Club of America. Morven was featured, and the luncheon, during the luncheon, they talked about all the different gardens, and then after lunch, they went and actually visited here, this garden that we have right behind us. And at Morven, Mrs. Stockton read to us her paper, A Quest for the Garden, interestingly giving the history of 200 years of this house, of this home of her family. And then they appointed, various committees and all that following that. But again, was it 200 years?
No.
No, it wasn't.
And if you read the article, it's actually a summary of the key myths that Helen promulgated during this period. But in terms of Morven's status as a historical house, this was national recognition, not just local recognition, not just Princeton, not just New Jersey, but national recognition as a historically significant place in America.
And as our viewers will know, Morven is a National Historic Landmark, and a lot of that is attributed to Helen's hard work. And the other 2 images on there are of a report of the 200th Christmas at Morven, again, that we already spoke about with the Tankard, and it goes into the details. So all of those things that Kim told you actually are mentioned in the paper. So you read it enough and you see it enough, you believe it, right? So we continue on with some of her myths. Right behind us, you can see the sundial. And this recording today is October 21st, 2021. The sundial was installed on October 21st, 1901. So this is the 120th anniversary, the 120th birthday of that sundial. So remember, it was installed then to commemorate the 200th anniversary of Morven's construction. So little twist with the numbers there. And in 1926, Helen adds a tablet on the garden wall, which I don't think you can see from here, but it's right beside the garden.
I think I may have
opening.
the inscription.
And it's inscribed with a verse from Alexander Pope's Ode to Solitude.
Hold on just a second. I didn't memorize
Which
it.
Kim will read to us.
Here we go. From Alexander Pope. Happy the man whose wish and care a few paternal acres bound, content to breathe his native air in his own ground. Actually, not bad.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's very beautiful. And so again, we're here because, in large part, to Helen. So what was her legacy?
So what was the legacy of Helen, the keeper of the flame? Helen spent decades of her life restoring Morven, establishing its place in the Garden Club of America literature, also some historical literature as well. I mean, she put this place on the history map. She made it so that this place was a place, a destination to come to. And in fact, recall that I mentioned and showed you a picture of President Harding visiting here in 1922 for the dedication of the battle monument. Well, two of the people who were there were Robert Wood Johnson and Senator Walter Edge, who later ended up living here. I mean, the effect that she had on the perception of Morven and its history was dramatic. In fact, it's probably the reason we're doing these videos and that historic Morven exists to this very day, because of what she did, her dedication, despite the exaggeration, despite the enhancements of this piece of history or that, she put Morven on the map.
So again, we're celebrating this anniversary of the sundial, but in the coming year, we're going to be celebrating a lot of anniversaries, thanks to Helen. In fact, this Festival of Trees, watch for, since this is the 120th anniversary of the Christmas party that Helen threw here. So watch for some program-related activities for that 120th anniversary. And also in June 9th of 2022, we will be actually celebrating the Battle Monuments dedication with programming and an exhibition, a small exhibition at Morven. So stay tuned for more Helen-related programs and stories. Thanks, Kim.
My pleasure.